Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Retirement Cafe podcast, which is brought to you by retirement planning specialist MFP Wealth Management. This episode is part of our series on longevity and retirement, where we take a look at the impact of living longer upon retirement life. Today, I'm absolutely delighted to be welcoming Lauren Wilkinson from the Pensions Policy Institute. Lauren has recently authored a report titled Living Through Later Life, and she's here to discuss the findings with me today. Welcome, Lauren.
Hi, Justin.
Hi, how are you doing?
Good, thank you. How are you doing?
Yeah, very well, very well. So thank you so much for spending some time with me this morning. Um, Tell me a little bit about yourself and how on earth you've ended up working for an organization called the Pensions Policy Institute.
So I've been at the Pensions Policy Institute for just over 3 years now.
Right.
Kind of ended up in pensions accidentally, which is what people often say. So before that, I was doing a master's in public policy and administration,
Okay. Wow.
and then joined the PPI as a policy researcher.
Yeah.
Now a senior policy researcher. And in my time with them, I've been able to work on a really broad range of pensions areas, which has been really interesting. So
Yeah.
worked on things around kind of consumer engagement, defined benefit, pension freedoms, really everything. So
and now you appear quite young. Did you know anything about pensions when you started at the Pensions Policy Institute?
absolutely nothing. So in my interview, I was asked if I knew anything about pensions, and I was quite honest about it. I didn't know anything. I know a lot more now, thankfully.
I can imagine. And I suppose, you can tell me a little bit about who the Pensions Policy Institute actually are, but I can imagine that you come across, in all the research that you do, you probably come across that people don't have a huge understanding of pensions.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're an educational research charity, and our aims are, firstly to engage the policy debate, to make sure that policy is based on fact-based evidence, but also for, the general public. We want them to be able to pick up our reports and learn something about pensions. So it's all written in plain English for them, that a layperson could understand.
Yeah, yeah. And so what's the real aim of the charity then? What's the real kind of purpose?
I think broadly it's to improve later life outcomes,
Right.
but beneath that it's about making sure that we're informing the policy debate. So any policies that are put in place are based on rigorous evidence.
Right, right. And hence the need for someone like you to do a lot of research.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so generally our reports will focus around policy changes, and they'll be looking at what the impact of that would be for, your average person.
Wow. So, well, tell me, tell me about this latest report that you've done.
Yeah, so really we wanted to find out what later life experiences were looking like for, a really diverse group of people.
Yeah.
Because as people are living much longer now, retirement experiences are very different to what they used to be. I think probably for my grandparents and their parents, it was more of kind of a winding down at the end of life. Whereas for my parents who've recently retired, it's more about actually engaging in more leisure activities, volunteering in the community, and kind of having a longer period there, because people will spend kind of 20 to 30 years from state pension age until the end of their life.
And of course, a lot of this, therefore, pensions are, to me, a pension is, getting paid whilst not working. And, whatever savings you've put aside to allow you to do that. And of course, if we're all living longer and maybe we're a lot more active, we've probably all got to put a lot more money away.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously things have changed recently in 2015 with the pension freedoms getting introduced. So people have a lot more flexibility in how they're using their savings. And that means obviously they can tailor their income to meet their needs over the course of later life as that changes, because obviously people are more likely to be spending more in the early years when they're more active. And then later on, as they spend more time at home and things like that, they might spend less. And then there's a potential for care costs further down the line.
Yeah. And so you've in the report you did you set out, didn't you, the kind of different phases of retirement. Can you talk to me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so we based the 3 phases around people's health levels, kind of physical disability and difficulty doing everyday activities. So the independent phase is where people have limited physical disabilities. They tend to be quite healthy, quite active, and this is when they can engage with those positive later life activities. They might still be in I've just had an alert go off. Sorry, did you hear that?
No, I didn't. No, I
Oh,
didn't.
sorry, I'll
All
carry
right.
on. Yeah, so they might still be working, they might be volunteering, they can engage with the community more, do things that promote physical and cognitive health. Um, they might be providing care for grandchildren or for a partner or even for their parents, because
Yeah.
obviously with people living longer, we've got people who are entering retirement and their parents are still in retirement. And then the decline phase is where people start to experience those kind of mild physical limitations.
Right.
So that could be something like difficulty walking up several flights of stairs without resting, and also cognitive things like difficulty using a map to find their way around a strange place.
Right.
That's when really the risks start to appear in terms of people experiencing things like bereavement of a partner, in terms of social isolation, and it's when people start to perhaps experience declines in mental health. We then have the dependent phase, which is more severe physical limitations.
Right.
So that would be things like difficulty bathing or dressing, or even just walking across the room. And all the risks associated with the decline phase are increased within the dependent phase. And that's where people will probably need the most support, particularly if they want to continue living in their own home. They'll need support there.
But one of the things that I thought was quite interesting was I think in your research paper, which I have had an opportunity to look at, was there's a graphic which kind of shows that the decline phase or the dependent phase. There's an awful lot of people who don't actually get to that stage.
Yeah,
There's some good
absolutely.
news in this, isn't there? I mean, there's an awful lot of people who manage to get, to 90 or what have you, and in relatively good health.
Absolutely. So, as I said earlier, there's a really diverse group of older people, and that means that what they experience will be really diverse. So while we've got these three phases, and some people will transition through, so they'll retire into the independent phase, they'll then at some point go into the decline phase and then the dependent phase. There are others where they might stay in the independent phase for their whole life, or others who'll retire directly into the dependent phase. We've even seen evidence of some people making reverse transitions.
Brilliant.
So they might have had a sudden health decline that would see them in the dependent phase for some time. But if they have effective rehabilitation, they can actually go back to the decline or the independent phase. So that's why it's really important for people to get the support they need when they experience these declines.
Yeah. What would you say that, what was the most kind of shocking thing that you came across that kind of you weren't expecting in this research?
I think I wasn't totally not expecting it, but I think the huge disparity in later life experiences between men and women, but also people with different levels of wealth.
Right.
We already knew that people with lower levels of wealth have on average lower life expectancies.
Yeah.
But seeing the proportion of those people that are retiring with really severe physical limitations compared to people at the top end of the spectrum where they can be reaching 90 and still be in really good health was really quite concerning.
Yeah, money does make a difference into people's standards of living, obviously, and in later life even more so, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's the difficulty of trying to get people to save more for later life, but obviously they've got so many demands during working life on their money. So it's, finding a balance there and ensuring that there are safety nets in place for people that don't have those levels of savings.
Absolutely. One of the key things, and I think you just touched on this, I noticed in the report, one of the statements is that women are more vulnerable than men to a poor retirement experiences. They are more likely to be carers, as well as having a greater likelihood of being in decline and dependent phases at almost all ages. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So women have longer life expectancies on average, and that could be why they're more likely to be in the decline and dependent phases, because they're living longer and spending longer in those phases. But there's, a lot of things. So yeah, they're more likely to be carers. They're also more likely to experience bereavement of a spouse. So I think they're about twice as likely as men to lose a spouse.
Right.
And all of these things compound to actually put women really at risk. And of course then they're also less likely to have significant levels of pension savings, so they're less likely to support themselves effectively through those experiences.
Yeah. And what would you hope that, I mean, with that knowledge, what would you hope that people can, or policy can come out of this, or people can take more action? What would you hope to see come out from the conclusions of your report?
I think on an individual level, it's really, really important that people plan and prepare well ahead of time, not just financially, but also thinking about the experiences that they might face and
Mm.
what they would do in that situation. So, for example, if they reach the point where they do need some form of care, do they want that in their own home? Do they want to go into a care facility? And can they afford to have care coming into their own home? Things like that. Also, things like putting a power of attorney in place. So one of the quite surprising findings in the research was that only around a third of people over 65 have a power of attorney in place.
Yeah.
And obviously, as people reach older ages, they're more likely to put that in place. But I think even, someone my age should probably have one in place just in case, because the things that we'll go through are quite unpredictable, particularly for people at older ages. They don't know when they will go through that decline that would necessitate having that. And, as I mentioned, with pension freedoms being introduced, the decisions people are making about their pension savings are becoming more complex. And they're also decisions that people will have to make on an ongoing basis over the entirety of their later life, unless they choose to purchase an annuity. So that means that, when people are reaching 80, 90 and they're experiencing accelerated cognitive declines, they'll still be having to make decisions about how to manage their pension savings
Yeah.
if they don't have a power of attorney in place. So it's really important to plan ahead for that.
Absolutely. I mean, it's one of the things that I kind of feel that as soon as we get to 18, we should probably just be made to get a will and be made to have powers of attorney. I mean, it just seems you're going to need one at some point in your life. So why not have it as soon as you reach that age, but, that's my
Yeah,
own.
definitely. But I think particularly with later life planning, people, because it can be associated with quite negative things, people don't want to think about themselves experiencing those health declines or losing their partner, and so people put off that planning. But that planning can really improve the experiences that they have.
Yeah, yeah. Now, I understand that you've also just published a second report on how people fund later life and address the challenges they face. I mean, everything you've mentioned so far is a lot of it comes down to economics of, personal financial situations. And if you want a more successful retirement, you need a few more pounds in your pocket. So this second report, I'm very interested in what your findings are there.
Yes, I think the key takeaway from the second report was that really from industry and from government, there needs to be more support over the course of later life.
Right.
People need to be supported before they reach retirement. And I think there's a lot of focus at the moment around that, around kind of engaging people earlier. Whether that's successful or not, we'll see in the future. But I think there's not a lot of focus on actually engaging people once they've retired, and making sure that they do have plans in place, making sure that they have the advice and guidance that they might need. And I think a lot of people kind of struggle to put a value on advice, so not as many people as actually could benefit from accessing it are. So I think we need to make sure that we drive up the levels of advice take up.
Yeah. How would you see that happening?
I think it would be engagement initiatives. I think it's really difficult with people that have already retired, because obviously during working life you have the employer as kind of an access point.
Yeah.
The government can reach out to the employer, who can then reach out to the employees. But once people have retired, particularly people that might be socially excluded, they're not engaging much with anything outside of their home. So it's really difficult to know what the touch points would be there.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, so what's next for the Pensions Policy Institute then? Where'd you go next? With with all this research that you've got? What's next on the agenda?
So we're working on a really broad range of areas, as always. My next project is working on an inequality indices. So we've recently done some work around the pensions gap between women and men.
Right.
And we'll now be creating an indice that basically looks at women, ethnic minorities, people with disabilities, to see what the gap is there and how policy might be able to address that.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, we experience that a huge amount. Of course, the different working careers, of course, are hugely I mean, obviously, we know there's an inequality with people's pay between men and women. We see that going on a lot, but also, of course, women take career breaks to have families, and then, of course, have less pension provision, and or don't return to work in the same way or the same seniority maybe they had before they left to have children. So it is a big issue when we're sitting and advising clients.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the thing is that obviously when women are taking career breaks and losing out on their pension because of that, often that's a decision made on the basis that their partner's pension will be able to support them. But something that came out in the research as well was that obviously single women pensioners, they're becoming increasingly prevalent. They've not necessarily got more provision than a woman who's married, and they can be particularly at risk of, decline independent phase at younger ages.
Yeah, yeah, fantastic. So I think you're doing some great work. It would be amiss of me not to understand who actually supports you. I appreciate you're a charity. I don't imagine that the Pensions Policy Institute are out there rattling cans as a charity. So who actually supports you and funds your research?
So we don't receive any government funding, but we run a
Right,
membership scheme. So we've
right,
got various regulatory bodies and pension providers and other groups from industry who pay a yearly fee to support us.
great.
And people generally also sponsor the research that we do. Yeah.
Wow, brilliant. And well, it's been fascinating talking to you and understanding what you do and well, the great work that you do. What would be one key lesson that you'd like our listeners to take away from our conversation this morning?
I think really it's just a simple one, but just plan. Like, make preparations now for your later life. I think it's the most important thing that anyone can do at any age.
Yeah, I agree. And you know, there is the aspect of unaffording advice and finding and where to seek advice from and who's going to be trusted. And I appreciate that. I understand that the FCA have, that's the Financial Conduct Authority, has said that only something like 6% of the UK population seek regulated advice, which of course that means 94% of people are well, not taking anything, but of course there is a lot of places where people can access advice, from the internet now, that information is available if they actually take control themselves to understand what are the things that need to be concerned by, and I would pass that on to the listeners and say, be aware of power of attorneys, be aware of wills, be aware of what your state pension provision is going to be. It's very easy nowadays to go online and get a state pension forecast and have a look at that and see if there's any holes or gaps in your record, and is it possible to make up those gaps, and then understand the pension provision that you've already got. Is it invested in the right place? What are the costs and the charges? Or if you're in a defined benefit pension scheme, what is it actually likely to produce? Not having any type of idea of what all those things are is a bit daft, really. And of course, if you do have that information available to you, you can start to create a plan of what that later retirement life will be like and whether you need to do something about it. But actually get the information available to you. And therefore, you can probably do a lot of planning yourself without having to seek expensive regulated advice, which is what obviously I provide. But I think if people can just take control a little bit themselves of understanding where they are, would be hugely helpful.
Yeah, definitely. And of course, there are free guidance facilities offered by the government. So the Money and Pension Service, which
Brilliant.
is the single body that's been made up of the Money Advice Service, PensionWise, and the Pension Advisory Service. I would say that should be the first port of call for anyone if they're wanting to plan for retirement.
Fantastic. That's brilliant advice, Lauren. I will make sure that we'll put links to yourself and your organization and the organizations that you've just mentioned in the show notes so everyone can access those. So, well, if you'd like to find out more about the Pensions Policy Institute and the work they're doing, you can check out, as I said, the show notes on our website, theretirementcafe.co.uk, where you'll find all those useful links. If you've enjoyed this episode, then please do leave a review on iTunes to help more people like you discover us. It really does help. If you've not yet subscribed, then you can do on our website, theretirementcafe.co.uk, or on your preferred podcast player. For further episodes in this series, please head to the website and search for longevity and retirement. So until next time, this is Justin King, helping you feel more informed in your retirement.